Hi, I'm Bill. Welcome to CP Talks. As this season is called The Ripples, and we'll be diving into the effects of your choices and the people around you and how their decisions affect you as well. We hope you enjoy it and see value and gain value in it, and make sure to like and to follow, and we'll dive right in. Thank you for joining with us for week 4 of CP Talks, The Ripples. With us today we have Dakota Crowe and Nina Crowe, and we're going to be hitting and talking a little bit about generational ripples. And with me today I got special guest Jordan Smallwood, who will sort of help steer and ask some of these questions. So Jordan, thanks for joining with us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Yeah, it's going to be fun.
It is going to be a lot of fun. So just a little backstory. This is my wife, and this is my oldest daughter, Dakota. And both have really been quite impressive with what they've been able to do and what God has done through them. So first off, I'd just like to start with, this is not a, hey, look at me kind of moment, or look at what my family has done at Crosspoint. I just want to put that out there. This is solely to sort of talk about the influences within Dakota's life, Nina's life, my life, and sort of what God has taken us from and where He's placed us and what He's doing with us now. All because of that moment of yes, or the ability to sort of have an ear to listen to what He's saying. So I just want to put that out there to sort of start the conversations there. So Dakota, I'd like to open it up with a little bit of your testimony or a little bit of your backstory, starting as far back as you want to go up till where you're at today, just so that the people listening know a little bit about you and what you're bringing to this conversation.
Okay. So then if I get to pick where I start, I'm going to start with elementary school. I started elementary school, and my parents decided that I was going to be private schooled because it was supposed to be a more welcoming environment, more loving environment. So you put me in a Christian private school, and it turned out to be the opposite. It turned out to be a place that was not super welcoming, not super friendly. And I ended up bullied there because I have a fake eye on my left side. It is a piece of plastic. It's not real. And it is just one of those things that doesn't really affect me anymore. But at that time, like, it was something that was strange and that kids pointed out a lot. And so that was hard, honestly. That was a little bit difficult, but it also prepared me for being in youth ministry here at Crosspoint and being able to, like, talk to other teenagers like myself and kind of be able to share my testimony with other teenagers, with adults, with the kids I work with. It helped me get to that comfortability. Outside of that, I was in kids ministry at another Assemblies of God church as long as I can remember clearly. And I aged out of children's ministry in that other church. And so I actually started helping in kids ministry at that other church as soon as I got out of there. Like, one week I was in there as a child, the next week I was in there as a volunteer. And honestly, that really has shaped me primarily because I've never been outside of the kids ministry. Like, I've always been a part of the ministry, whether I was as a child in the classroom or as a volunteer helping with that ministry. I've never left the kids ministry, really. So when we came here and my mom started helping in the kids ministry, that was kind of just an easy place to flow into, a comfortable place to flow into. So that's what I did. And then it's kind of one thing or another led over the last, Elijah's 6 now, so 6 years, to where we're at now, where I'm the children's ministry director over 2 campuses. And depending on if you count Thursdays or not, it is 9 classes. So it's a lot, but it's also fun. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about it.
Okay, so from aging out of kids' church or youth at that level is what age, roughly?
So at the church I was attending, it was 6th grade. But here at Crosspoint, it's 5th grade. We've noticed that our fifth graders that were going into sixth grade, so like kids that would be in sixth grade as of right now, they come until October, maybe November, and then they start to fade out. They don't stick in the kids ministry very long. But by the time that they do start fading out, they already made new cliques in the sanctuary, and our goal is to kind of let them all move out at the same exact time, so then they keep their little bit of community. And we observed that a little bit today with the kids kind of staying in their group and having somebody to talk to, somebody to be comfortable with. And so yeah, I started in kids ministry myself at sixth grade, and I don't know, that's 12, so 12 to 20, that's 8 years.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, 8 years working in the same ministry, starting and learning the ropes, basically. It's quite impressive, to be honest with you. So, Nina, I'm going to ask you the same thing. A little bit of sort of backstory and a little bit of explanation of who you are. And
Let's start with birth.
I actually was going to go back even maybe a little bit further than before I was born. So my my great grandma was really influential in bringing my immediate family, so my parents and my sisters, and honestly, it would have been before, my sisters maybe were really born, but getting us back to church, right? Like, my great grandma prayed a lot for her family, and when she passed, Dakota was 2 when she passed, and when she passed, like, there were several, family members that kind of maybe got their lives back in order with the Lord, and kind of, wanted to start having a relationship with the Lord. And so, like, she truly was such an instrumental part of my family's faith, right? Like, she was, every Sunday she was at church, and she always did family meals, and it was like, we were the kind of family that people didn't think existed anymore, right? Like, when when Bill came into the family, like, he was, very much like, is this for real? Like, you people really do this, like, every weekend, all weekend, like, you're together, you hang out, like, you spend time together, like, I grew up with third cousins, like most people grew up with their first cousins, you know what I mean? Like, it was like, we were friends, like, I didn't need friends anywhere else because I literally had them with my family, And so growing up in a family like that tight, like, that's a treasure in itself, And so fast forward to, even so, like, at 5, like, I, had this moment with the Lord in a revival meeting. And it's so funny, like, I can tell you, like, all these little 5-year-old details of this revival meeting, but it was a Baptist church. It had red carpet, which I think at that time, every Baptist church had red carpet.
The old red carpet,
yeah. And so there were stairs that went up to the podium, and the evangelist that was there, I don't remember how he ended up in this situation, but he had no legs. And so he, like, wheeled himself to the stairs and then climbed the stairs, and, he preached this fire sermon. I don't remember anything about it. All I remember is at the end, I knew I didn't want to go to hell. And, so all these people went to the altar, and I'm just this 5-year-old little girl. My parents are at the altar, all the people we were with, and I'm just, like, kind of in the back pew somewhere, and I'm like, he's like, if you want to get saved, like, raise your hand. And so, I'm like, hey, me, but nobody can see the little kid over the crowd, So then I'm, like, climbing on this pew, and I'm, like, on my tiptoes, and, like, finally somebody comes and prays with me. And I remember, like, once I was done praying, like, I remember, like, looking up, and my mom's, like, there with tears in her eyes, like, what a precious moment to watch your child give their life to the Lord, And then as a teenager, I definitely found myself into some people pleasing. It's just one of those terrible things that I still don't think that I am completely over, but people pleasing took me down some paths that, eventually ended me up in a relationship and pregnant before I was married.
I'm not mad about that, though. Like, I like it. That part of the story can stay the same because, like,
Dakota exists.
I like being here.
So, in fairness, while there was shame in having to tell people that I was pregnant, that is definitely part of my story that I swear, like, God allowed to happen so that I wouldn't go down other paths in this people pleasing.
Yeah.
Because then I had a person I had to please that was different, right? Like, I had to be a mom, and I had to make better decisions for my kid, you know? And that doesn't mean I made good decisions by any stretch of the imagination. I just made better decisions in some areas of my life, okay? And so, you know, Bill and I got married. We had this baby. And then, you know, to spare you all the gory details of our marriage, we have been divorced and remarried, and lots of separations and arguments and just stupid stuff, you know, throughout our marriage. And Dakota walked through all of that with us. She literally has seen enough stuff that, like, really could have destroyed a kid in faith, right? Like, she could have been like, my parents weren't real, you know, like, they were this at church and that at home, or this when mom was around and that when she wasn't, or whatever, you know. But what we, as crazy as it sounds, like, what we always tried to keep, like, center was God. Even if we weren't following him, we knew she needed him. Like, we knew that our kids, like, we wanted them to not have the regrets that we had. So we, you know, made church a priority. Well, that, and because I didn't want to have to hear my mom on the phone going, "Where were you today?" You know, like, she was very much keeping us, like, toeing the line, you know. But so I have some. Ended up back together, got remarried. I kind of said that already. And then we've had 3 more kids. We decided to renew our vows and had a dream wedding, which was phenomenal. And Pastor Jordan was there.
It was a wonderful, wonderful.
Be at that amazing wedding.
And somehow I still got to keep my youth bracelet on.
She did keep her youth bracelet on because it's all about youth. But then, you know, like Dakota had mentioned, we were at a different church, and some things, you know, kind of started going down, and God was kind of really telling Bill and I it was time to transition, but we didn't know where to go or how to make that transition. We didn't want to lose momentum of serving the Lord and things like that. And so we actually came to Crosspoint in February. And when we left, I pretty much just was like, don't ever ask me to go back there. Like, that place is too much like the place we just left. That scares me. Like, I don't want to be a part of that. And we went to another church in Waynesburg for a little while. And at that church, we never made connections. And that's not a normal thing for Bill and I. Bill and I are pretty much like a connections family. You know, we strive in having relationships with people. And so we were there for a few months, and it was Mother's Day, and we went to my mom's, we had stopped at a nursery, and we picked up some flowers, and we took them out to my mom. She's like, "So what did your church give you for Mother's Day today?" And I don't know, we went to the nursery, like, we didn't go to church. And she's like, "How long has it been?" And I said, 4 weeks. And she very much was like, "You're going to get yourself in a habit that you're not going to be able to get out of," you know. And so we got in the car, and Bill and I had that conversation of, she's not wrong, you know. I don't like it, but she's not wrong. And so the following week, I had to take some pictures at the softball fields in Carmichael's, and that meant we were not going to have time to go to Waynesburg to go to church and then come back to Carmichael's to do these pictures. So it was like, well, what are we going to do? And we're like, I don't know, like, what are we going to do? And I said, well, maybe we could go back to Crosspoint. And he pretty much was like, you said never again. And I'm like, I know what I said, but maybe we could go back, you know? And so that Friday, when Dakota mentioned Elijah 6, that's how long it's been, that Friday, Josh and Anne-Marie had Elijah, and we're still out of the church that Sunday. And so Pastor Andrew actually had preached that Sunday, and when we left, we just had this conversation, and it was like, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened between, February and May, but I feel like I just went home, and we kind of really just haven't left. Sometimes we sleep here, sometimes we...
Here you are.
We do. We're here all the time. Like, yeah, we...
It's creepy in the dark.
It can be.
It's fascinating to see the way that some of the ripples have happened just throughout your family,
Yeah.
But something that you said really caught my attention, because you mentioned how, having Dakota, I think about some of the old church mentality of having someone out of wedlock and that child's a bastard and they're cursed and some of that mentality. But man, the way that God restores, and so just thinking of the blessing and the ripple effects that Dakota now has on all these children, from an aspect of it really just comes down to how we allow God to move, right? I mean, regardless if it's a quote-unquote mistake or poor decision or whatever, God can still move in those things when we allow him to, right? I mean, when we turn into him, and man, just seeing that God's faithfulness for years, even, I mean, you guys can speak on, your experience in life and your adventures, but that just caught my attention,
It's funny because, whenever I said we still weren't making great decisions, inside of our marriage, really, one of the things that I think we were always very together on was how we raised our kids. We have always really been on the same page with how we disciplined or how we talked to them, or for the most part, sometimes you have a bad day and you got to kind of correct each other, hey, that was a little rough, But one of the things I think early on, we knew that they aren't our kids. I gave birth to them, he's their father, but they're not ours. They're the Lord's, and what he wants for them and his path for them is so much more important than what we would want for them. It's so much more, and so when she came to us at 15 and decided she needed to go on a mission trip at 15 to Guatemala, I remembered my mom when my sister, came to her at 16 maybe, and said that she needed to go to the Philippines for a missions trip. And my mom, people would give her a hard time a little bit, and she would just say she is safer in God's will than she is here. And so when the time came for Dakota to, come to us with this, I need to go on this missions trip, I instantly started saying that to people, she's safer in Guatemala than she'll ever be by my side if that's where God wants her to be, and in Daniel, where the Bible says, and even if not, if he called her to go to Guatemala and something happened and she didn't make it home, it still was the plan. It's still, it's still there's still an impact made. There's still whatever that looks like. Which,
Even
thank
if
you,
faith.
Jesus, for letting her come home.
Well, so it even comes down to sometimes what we feel or hear from God asking us to do something isn't necessarily to give us a blessing right then, right? It's more to see, are you going to listen to me? And it's more of a test to say, all right, I can trust you with that, so here you go, kind of. You know what I mean? Not just saying hey, we should do that with everything, but in some ways I feel like sometimes people think of it well, I wanted that and I asked God for it, but he didn't give that to me. Or instead I got this, and it's yeah, but you still listened and did what you felt like you were told to do, you know? So with that being said, it's you graduated from riding your mom and dad's faith, your grandma's faith, to it's Dakota faith. It's your faith, right? How did you?
That was a little ironic.
If you like that, but when did that click for you that it's real to you, right? Because a lot of kids come to church or do church because they're drugged to church or it's their parents or whatever. But you stepped out and made that like it's real for you. Yeah. And we see the effects of that. But if you could sort of speak a little bit about like what that is and how did you make that choice?
The choice of faith?
The choice that it's yours. Okay. It's not your parents' faith, it's not your parents' church, it's your church. And you choose to come to church, you choose to read your Bible, you choose to pray. At that point, it's not a told you or tell you to do kind of faith. It's you choose to do it because it's your faith.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if I can piggyback, it's just saying, like, how did you get to this point, right? Because I even thought of that when you were saying about, growing up in youth ministry, right? It's one thing to see your parents doing that, but then, like, now you're doing that. So it's like, I often think about, like, pastors' kids, right, and how they become pastors. It's like, what part of it, like, when did it really click for you that this is what you're supposed to do, not just because, like, mom and dad were doing it,
Well, and even at that, like, I don't know if kids ministry is something I'm going to do forever.
Okay.
Part of me thinks...
I'm locked in now. Go on.
Breaking news, Dakota's not always going to be in children's.
But to answer both questions, the one defining moment that I can think of that, like, really locked me in that, like, this isn't just do church. This is like, I need to do something more impactful. I need to take this as my own type of a moment. Was at youth convention one year. It was one of the first times I came with Crosspoint to youth convention, and Pastor Josh was still going, and Anne-Marie with the little stroller and all the little kids, and so they were both going as like the leaders. And I have a really fun cat story about Anne-Marie we can talk about if we want to, but
I'm aware.
Poor Anne-Marie.
It is a
I
good
love
story.
the cat story.
It is a good story.
I love the cat story. But during that convention, we all would go down to the mosh pit. So they have it at the PPG Paints, not the PPG Paints, the Giant Center in Hershey, and they have it there, this huge thing. All of the youth groups from our area, from like Pennsylvania and Delaware, like would come down. So like you have this whole big arena full of teenagers. And just like at camp they choose a night for both the kids and the youth to have like a Holy Spirit encounter night, where like they pray for the baptism in the Holy Spirit for both the kids and the youth. They do it for both age groups. But they do that at convention as well. And so the one night they did that call, and at the same time as they did the call for baptism in tongues, they did a call for missions. And so I went down to the front, and I don't know if I really did get baptized in tongues. For that moment, I felt like it, but I haven't had an encounter with it since. So I don't know if it was just a thing where I was a teenager and I was just doing what I saw people doing around me, or if it was a legitimate encounter. But I don't know if that's the case. But very clearly, as clear as day, I heard that I was going to be a missionary one day. And so that's why I say I don't know if I'll be in kids forever. Like, I could be in kids, like, in another country or in another town even. Or I might just go into missions. I don't know. But I'm still holding to that is a real thing that I felt from God, and it wasn't just my head. Like, it was like my first, like, time that I felt like I heard from God himself, and that, like, I had that special kind of encounter. And it was just so clear as day. So that's kind of why I said I don't know if I'll be in kids ministry forever, because I don't know what that chapter will look like, but I'm excited for it. And that's really whenever I decided to take it as my own. I knew that the level I was at was not something that would be prepared for, or I wasn't in preparation yet for something like that, and that I needed to start building my own faith. So that's kind of when I started to adopt it as my own, was in youth group. And it was that's kind of why. So.
Well, you clearly had an encounter, right? That's what it comes down to. But if you were Baptist, I mean, that's a whole other, we could a whole other podcast on that. But I mean, you clearly had an encounter at that convention, right? And that's, so it sounds like that's when like things started clicking. If that
Yeah,
sound
absolutely.
So, from a mom's perspective, or even a dad's perspective, to be honest with you, but from that kind of a perspective, a parent's perspective, watching, you sort of touched on it a little bit about Dakota coming to you and saying, hey, I want to take this missions trip, right? So now you got to trust that, all right, God is really leading her, and I'm going to trust that God has the plan. Like, up to this point, it's always been, all right, this is what you're allowed to do, this is what you need to do, go here, go there kind of thing. But now it's like, what's it like to sort of walk in that and not really second guess it?
Well, there's one thing for sure, and that is that there is no junior Holy Spirit. There's no junior,
preach, girl.
you know, he's going to speak to her in a little kid's way. Like, he doesn't work like that. Like, if you're his, you're his, you know, and whether that's when you're 5 or when you're 95, right? Like, he loves his children the same. You know, he uses us with the gifts that he equipped us with, you know, and so for me, it's crazy, but I just had peace. Man, I had peace. I pushed her into children's ministry. Like, while she's like kind of heels in the ground, like, no, I think I want to do, you know, the soundboard or, you know, whatever else. And I'm like, no, girl, I'm telling you, it's kids. Like, it's kids. And it took her a while to like really, you know, accept that, because she does enjoy those things as well, you know, but it was like, I'm watching you. I see your gifts blooming and unfolding, and I see you talk to these kids and relate with them, and I see you, you know, bring them alongside you and teach them. And so, I don't know, I guess, like, again, she's not mine. Like, I just get the privilege of having the front row seat, like you always say, you know, to watching them. Like, I have to trust him with her because he loves her more than I do, right? Like, and trust me, as a parent, that makes no stinking sense. Like, how could anybody love my kid more than I love it, you know? But I know he does. And while it doesn't make sense, I trust that he does. And so I trust that if she's praying and she's following him, I don't have to worry about her. Like, that's for her and him to figure out, you know?
Just ask you guys, and this is gonna get nice and touchy-feely.
Let me just grab this tissue real quick.
So, you know, you guys have touched on a little bit of, you know, some of the decisions you made and how the culmination of those things could have, for lack of a better word, like derailed, right? But like, how proud are you to see like the ripples of all of your children, not just Dakota, but all of your kids? I mean, they're all faithful and obedient, and I mean, it's fun to see, you know? So like,
let me just tell you, they are amazing children, and I have no idea why God blessed us with them. I have no idea why, other than he knew I'd probably kill him if they didn't. You know, I don't know what his reasoning was. But it does not come without challenges. You know, we have moments at home that we have to work on attitudes, and we have to, you know, talk about tough things. And, you know, they've come to us with some really like, dude, we taught you better than that. What the heck are you doing? Like, why? Why is this even an issue, you know? But I feel like Bill and I both early on decided listening to them was the most important thing we could do. You know, we can put boundaries around them, and we can make them stay in the dog fence and not go outside of it, you know? But when you do that, the second that the gate is left open, they're little Marleys running down to the neighbor's house eating the chickens, you know?
I hope
like,
parents hear this part for real. Like, this is huge. Go, proceed.
But, you know, you have to almost, you know, the old saying, give them enough rope to hang themselves, you know, and then be there ready to chop the rope so that they don't hang themselves. But it's like, you know, sometimes it's like, this is really tough. Like, I don't know how to handle it. I don't know what to do, you know? And truly, though, it's like, again, I don't know why God gave us children that aren't afraid to come to us and go, take this. It's a stumbling block for me right now. Like, I can't work with this right now. I can't do this, you know, whatever. And outside of Rayleigh, we haven't really experienced that with Rayleigh yet. But all three of the older kids, we have Dakota, Emma, and Micah have all come to us with different things, you know, and we're just like, okay, like, here we are, you know, and is it, to some degree, you have to realize that they're human and they're going to make mistakes. And so, I mean, I won't pretend like I handle everything well, even sometimes. Sometimes I'm hot-headed. Sometimes I blow off, run my mouth, punch things, you know. It's not always pretty, but at the end of it, you know, you sit down and you have that conversation and you apologize, you know, for the things that you did get wrong, and you explain where they were wrong, or you know, have those conversations.
It's almost like a sobering moment to really think through, like, the things that we have done to try to derail it. We didn't purposely, or we didn't maybe in the moment think that we were, but we were really doing things to derail it, and for God to take really ashes and turn it into that. But it also allows them to see, like, the real side of things, right? So all of our kids and anybody that does life with us.
Yeah.
There's no, like, who I am here. It's the same as I am at home.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm mad at you, you're gonna know it. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I'm not gonna pretend. If they did something wrong, I'm gonna call them out on it. You're right there in the moment.
Yeah.
But I'm also gonna explain to them. It's like, listen, what you're doing right now doesn't make any sense. And if you continue to do that, you're going to create or have habits that you're not going to be able to deal with when you're an adult. So you either make the choice now to fix that, or you deal with it even bigger messes whenever you're an adult.
Yeah.
Because if you don't get a handle on certain things, whether it's addiction to porn or video games or lying, or not doing what you're told, or not doing what you're supposed to, or just the simple things in life, if you don't nail those things down as a kid or a teenager, because at a certain point you start making those choices on your own.
Yeah.
Right? It's like going to church on your own, or serving on your own. Like, you make those choices yourself, you know what I mean? And for me, it was one of those, like, I come to, and I do what I do because I feel like that's what I'm called to do. And for me to get to see my daughter and my wife and Emma and Micah stepping in those same things and having those same moments of, I do this because I feel like God's calling me to do this. Like, I don't tell Micah to serve upstairs. I don't tell Emma to serve upstairs. You know what I mean? Like, Rayleigh started her first adult church today, you know? So it's like all of our kids now are in youth or have graduated out of youth group at this point.
Yeah.
And to watch them sort of become their own person within God it is kind of a proud moment, honestly. Not to boast on what I've done, but just to see what God is doing with.
Yeah. Well, it's
think-
God, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so when even just through VBS, we just had like the way that I was able to examine Dakota first and foremost, holding down this whole fort. Like Emma commands
impressive.
a classroom. Like those kids are attentive.
Yeah.
You know, Micah, they're loving on him, like loving to follow him around. Like you all have walked into leadership too. So it's not just like you're here. I mean, you're leading. So I'm just curious. So like, that's their perspective, right? But like, what was it for you? Because you're the only one here that can speak to this. Like, all these things that could have derailed you. Like, what was it that kept you like in line, so to speak? Like, can you speak to that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
I'd
nobody's
probably say-
perfect, so I'm not saying like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
I'd probably say for the most part, like the community aspect of church, like not just this church, like I had that community aspect at my last church as well, with the teens and the kids that I was in class with or in youth ministry with. Like I had those relationships with people. And so like even whenever I would have a moment where I'm like really mad at them, or like something went wrong, or just not having a great time, don't want to be here, having real conversations with those friends that I've developed here at the church or at our last church, and just being like, hey, listen, this is really what's on my head right now. This is what sucks. And they like help me, like friends do. They help you talk through it, process through it, and then everything's okay. Like in hard moments, it's not necessarily something that, like, I'm not gonna lie, today we had a few call-offs and I had a teacher that said they wanted to step down today. Like, ministry is hard sometimes, and having that support group around you, that like those friends that like I can go and say, hey, listen, I know I'm with you today, but this is what's on my heart right now. And like you can have some of the most impactful conversations that way, and it keeps you here. Like, church is a unique place. Like, there's outside of like school and work, you don't have many other places that you consistently go to multiple times a week, that you have community with consistent people and can have relationship with. Like, even at work, so you don't necessarily always get to just sit there and talk to people, but here you get to do life with them and just talk with them and build relationship. And that alone, like, biblically, you're supposed to continue to go to church and meet with other believers, and I believe that's why. Like, without the community aspect and without the friendships and relationships, people could really sink in their faith. And there have been times where, like, during COVID, it was really hard for everybody. And honestly, half the time, the only reason I was okay was because I was doing live streams for the kids. Like, we came up with different ways that we would, like, one day we were starting to script out what our live stream would look like, so then we could, like, teach the kids points every Sunday. And then we started having people back in the building to, like, record the services and record what we were gonna do. COVID safe at that time, what we thought was COVID safe. But it was just a thing that it was like, when you lose that relationship, you can feel it, and having that relationship makes the difference.
One thing that we do, I think, well here is relationships. Whether it's welcoming you the first time that you walk through the door, throwing your arms around somebody, like, regardless of who or what it is, right? Because I truly believe that the first step that a person can make is walking through the doors. If they never make that choice, or if they never say yes to that, then God can reach people outside of these walls. I agree with that. But there has to be a point in somebody's life that they have to come to that, like, yes moment, you know, and to, like, the impact that you're going to have, the both of you, right? The children's department for Crosspoint was developed and basically runs off of what y'all have put into place. So the impact of the ripples, you may never get to see the full impact of what one, here's a snack, or one, here's a juice pouch, or one, here's a Bible lesson for this week, impact to one kid, right? Because if you think about it, like, the next Josh Koss or the next Dakota Crowe or the next Jordan Smallwood could be sitting upstairs or down here now, that since they've graduated up to here, right? So in some ways, seeing that group of kids graduate up to this level, what is that like to watch? Like, you have a younger sibling, right, who you have really mentored or led through the most part of her childhood church life. What's that like?
I'll answer that one, but I want to touch on what you said a minute ago. You can see the impact within the kids' lives, even as kids. I had a story that was shared with me, and I won't say names, obviously, because confidentiality and wanting to make sure that that family's comfortable. But I had a family that shared a little bit of their child's story, and it started with this one little boy was brought to church here by a friend because they felt it would be really, really good for him, and he was socially awkward a little bit, and he needed somewhere to belong. And this friend said, "Oh my gosh, this would be the perfect place for you. Just try it out once." And that was before summer started, and this child hasn't left. I got to meet his mom for the first time. She started to come around a little bit. Hopefully we'll start seeing her around a lot more, but it's a huge step that she was here on Thursday. But she shared a little bit of the boy's testimony, and it broke my heart. This little boy was considering suicide the week before he came to church. And the mom shared with me that she's discussed this with him since then, and like talked to him about his self-worth and self-value, and he essentially was like, "Mom, like that's not even a worry anymore, like I'm good." And shared about how like he's excited to come to church, he has friends again, he's not sad and lonely anymore. Like, I guess that's just back to the community aspect, that these kids, as much as it's beneficial for the adults in the room, like to be able to hang out with Joe Smo or to just see somebody and like catch up with them, these kids need it. Like, a lot of these kids have had a lot of trauma from being isolated during COVID and all this stuff, and it really affects how they are, and this can be a safe place for them. But as to watching kids that I've grown up with, like this year was probably really hard for me, if I'm being honest. Like, we started at Crosspoint 6 years ago, and the elementary classroom is for kids 1st to 5th grade. Last year, I don't think we had any that like started out at Crosspoint that moved up, so it wasn't the same, because last year would have been the year that would have happened. But this is the first year that we've had to let kids go that I've watched the entire time. So I have this group of kids that are my huge indication of like, I started kids ministry here in the elementary room when those kids started in the elementary room. So like I've been doing life with them for so long that like a lot of them were crying today. I was crying today. It wasn't fun. But it was also really, really good for them. And I saw a few of them sneak upstairs. A few of them tried to sit with me in the nursery, and I had to tell them. I had to tell them no. One little boy went upstairs. His mom was teaching today, and like just tried to sit in on the service and try to answer questions, and she had to send him back downstairs. And they all came over. I was running check-ins this morning, and they all came over and was like, "Hey, Miss Dakota, where's my tag?" And I'm like, "Babes, I can't give you tags anymore." And they were like, "Yeah, you can give me a tag. I can just take one." And they're smart enough to know how to use the check-in system for the iPad that we have set aside for self-check-ins. So they tried that, but I already had it altered to where they couldn't check in anymore, and they were very upset about it.
That was heartbreaking.
Yeah, they all came over. It was they all came over, and they just like, the one little girl like gave me the dirtiest look ever, and she was like, "What'd you do?" And I was like, "I fixed it. Like, this is how it goes now." And she's like, "That's mean. You shouldn't have done that." But no, like this group of kids was really hard for me because like obviously they're not my kids, I'm not their parent, but like I have been with them for like 5 years, 6 years. The one that will really wreck me is a little girl named Aisley. The first time I was helping at our last church, she was one of the infants that I was helping with. So I have literally been with her on and off her entire life. So whenever she moves out, that'll be my next like gut-wrenching point. That'll be my next gut-wrenching point. And so it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's so rewarding to get to see those kids and watch them go from coming into the classroom and having to learn how to sit still long enough for us to get through our lesson to now they're the ones in the back of the classroom raising their hand over every question, helping the other kids find verses, and some of them getting bored out of their minds because the lessons are geared towards some like the elementary age, and some of them are just ready for middle school. And that's kind of the point where I'm like, okay, it's like it's your time. And every kid hits that point differently. There were some 5th graders that were like totally could have stayed in there another year. But like I said earlier, like it's really important for me to for them to have that community aspect, and them all coming down at one time versus in a month or two really makes that difference for those kids. It gives them a group, it gives them their community still. They don't have to rebuild that.
So I'd like to talk about the negative ripples, right? Because not all ripples are good. They could be used for good, but you grew up with parents, and I mean, I feel comfortable saying this, that not all of our decisions would have created or caused good ripples in your life, right? And some people would use some of the things that Mom and I have went through or done to each other or to even you or your siblings, that they would have used that as a crutch to enable them to make some really bad or poor choices, to just write it off as, well, it's because my parents X, Y, Z, right? But with that being said, it's like you could use that to say, that's why I drink, or oh, that's why I had sex before marriage, or oh, that's why fill in the blank, right? And for me, with some of the choices that your mom and I have made, I've allowed that to sort of harden my heart in some ways towards God, and in some ways sort of turn well, no, I can't do that, or I'm not going to do that because of this, or if you loved me, those things wouldn't have happened. So how did you find yourself not doing that?
I think a lot of it had to do with like my age and stuff. Like kids are more trusting and more, I don't know if it's the right word, but like they rebound quicker with that kind of stuff, I feel. And like the fact that it didn't continue, like there were times, but it didn't continue through my teenage years, that really played a big factor in it, because I feel like your teenage years are the years that you fully start to like blame things. Like as a kid, it's like, yeah, this sucks, like this is just a hard time. But as a teenager, it's like, okay, well, who's the fault of this? Why is this like this? Like, who can I push this on to? I think it could have been different if it would have continued the way it was through me being a teenager, but it didn't. At least not to that level, but it didn't. So that played a big factor in it. And like, even whenever you guys would struggle with different things, it was never a situation that I didn't have another positive role model. Like even whenever you two were at your weakest moments, like I still had like my grandparents, I still had my aunts, I still had my uncles, I still had my pastors. I had my strong support group around me that like even whenever one piece of that support group, and a very large piece of that support group, but even whenever it would fall a little bit and falter, I still had a safety net. And I think that the biggest reason that some of those kids feel that way is that either they haven't been built for, or they haven't built themselves a safety net in which they have community and have people that they can come to and just kind of be like, hey, listen, this is kind of what my thoughts are, and like talk with them through it. And I've seen a lot of kids upstairs that have talked to me about things that honestly, before I started kids ministry, didn't even realize that kids dealt with. Like I was protected from that in elementary school a lot of the ways, because I was in private school for a lot of my younger elementary years. But a lot of these kids are in public school, and they're with these other kids 8 hours a day, and they're seeing and hearing things that no parent would ever dream their kids are aware of. And so I see a lot of this kind of stuff, and kids will open up about that very easily with people that they trust. And I had a lot of those kind of people, and I try my best to be that person for every one of the kids upstairs because they need it. Like, sometimes there are things that they just don't want to talk to their parents about, and that's what I'm there for. And I feel like that was the big deciding factor, was that I had that myself.
So it sounds like you just kind of knew who to lean on, right? And as much as there was quote unquote poor decisions, you guys clearly would have instilled Jesus at some point. And it just reminded me, that's what I pulled up my phone for, is Matthew 7:24-27. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it has been founded on the rock. So I think that's what happened there. You know, your foundation was
Like, even though we made poor decisions that brought the storms, we still built on the rock.
Whoops.
Which doesn't even make sense, really. Like, it sounds like so oxymoron, right? Like, how did you build your family on Jesus while you were...
Well, it's almost like we were doing what I started out this conversation with, is we were almost like riding the coattails of your mom and dad's faith. And I say that just because my parents sort of walked away, or they tried to play church a lot, but they weren't what I would consider like, here's what a Christian looks like, right? Like a real genuine, here's what I am on Sunday, here's what I am on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and it's going to be the same as I am on Sunday. Yeah. And so we really rode the coattails of your mom's and your dad's faith for a lot of Dakotas growing up. And for me, it was like, while we were at First Assembly, whenever it started to click and really like become mine, for me personally. And then some things happened and it just sort of squashed that. And to be honest with you, it wasn't until a few years of being here that it started to come back for me. And I would like to hear sort of from you, like, what that was like growing up with somebody who was almost like a spiritual mom and dad for me. You got to live with it. And then that same person always and played a big role, I think, in what our kids are today. So generationally speaking, your mom and dad laid the groundwork and the bed for us to sort of help and to nurture sort of what they started, you know.
So it's funny because, like, thinking of like my childhood and stuff, like, my parents struggled a lot, both in their marriage and financially and raising kids, and, you know, carrying around dark secrets that, you know, people didn't know about. You know, they now know, you know, they had an abortion before they had me, you know, but they didn't tell anybody that. That was a secret that, you know, kept them muffled for years. And, you know, trying to raise 3 kids and barely make a minimum wage, you know, the Lord, though, like, always intervened, like he does, right? Like, the house we grew up in, my kitchen, my dining room table is made out of wood from this house, like, you know, but that house was a house that we only had because Dad's boss bought it, and they bought it back from him, like a rent-to-own sort of situation, you know. Just God's provision for them to be able to raise their family, you know. Having a car sometimes was a big deal, you know. Just trying to one clunker to the next, you know, just to be able to make it. And my parents just were always faithful financially they were faithful. That is something that I did not get from them. Like, sorry, Lord, I need to do better. But they were always financially faithful. They were always, you know, church on Sunday. We grew up in Baptist churches. And my mom would very lovingly call us the Baptist rebels, because we would get ready for church on Sunday mornings, and the churches that we would attend, most people would wear dresses to church. So we would get up on Sunday mornings, Wednesday nights, Sunday evenings, we'd put our dresses on, we'd go to church. Again, I mentioned earlier that we had like this tight-knit family. We had lunch at Grandma's every Sunday. But on the way home from church and before we got to Grandma's, we stopped at home and we put our pants or our shorts on, you know, our tank tops or our t-shirts, whatever, you know, and we would go to family dinner in our everyday clothes, you know. And so she would say we were the Baptist rebels because we did not follow this, you know, clothing guideline that was set before us. You know, we did not believe that, you know, for us. And so I think that in that, like, if there's something that could be said in both the family that I grew up in and the family that we're raising, is that we are who we are. There is no
transparency.
There is no Sunday, you know, Sunday Brenda and Ken and Monday Brenda and Ken. It was Brenda and Ken, you know. And more so Mom. Dad definitely for a little while maybe had some struggles that he would kind of, you know, you wouldn't see unless you lived there. He had some anger issues when we were growing up and stuff. And, you know, he has clearly, you know, grown through those and stuff. And he's a completely different person in that aspect. But that being said, like, we just were who we were. Like, I didn't know that you could be fake. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know that that was an option. Like, why would you want to be? Why would you want to have to, like, remember who you are when you're with these people and who you are with those people? Yeah. Like that just seems exhaustingly stupid to me. Like, why would you do that? You know? And so, Mom and I would butt heads growing up because she always just wanted more for me than what I was willing to do for myself, you know? And she would try to, you know, push me to be better. But one thing I think, God rest her soul, but one thing for sure is she had way too much faith in us. She thought she taught us right from wrong and we would just do right, you know? And so when I'm coming to her at 18 years old and telling her I'm pregnant, when her response was, how, you know? And it was like, how did this happen, you know? Yeah. It wasn't really that surprising to me because I knew that she had no idea that I was doing something that could, you know, land me with a baby in my belly, you know? And so, you know, she definitely had this, you know, blind faith with us that we were just doing what was right because she told us it was right, you know? And I think that is one thing I did learn from her is that as much as, you know, I try to teach the kids right from wrong, I still anticipate something, you know, whatever it is. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm expecting them to come home at 19 and tell me they're pregnant. And, you know, Dakota made it to 20. We have made it past 19. My grandma, my mom, and myself all had babies at 19. So to get the first daughter through that, like,
good job, Dakota.
19 years, we made it.
That
We're
was
good.
my goal.
We made it.
Now I can
Success.
get married and have a kid.
But I don't know. And then, you know, I mentioned the Mother's Day, right? Like, even into adults, like, even into last fall, you know, like, she was my spiritual mom just as much as she was my physical mom. Like, and I miss her so much because I know what she meant to me, but I also know what she meant to my kids. And it makes me mad sometimes that, like, Ray won't have her through those teenage years, like, because I know that when I would be struggling with my mom and I would go to my grandma sometimes would be like, taking my side or, whatever. But I know my mom, no matter if I was right or wrong, she pointed my kids back to Jesus. And that's the key to raising kids, to serving with kids, like, no matter what it is, like, Jesus is your answer. Like, your parents will fail you. Your pastors will fail you. Your mentors will fail you. It will happen, but Jesus will never. He cannot. He cannot. Bill and I had this conversation last night, and I was like,
Hold on. The question is to Jordan.
oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
All
I
right.
like this
Yes.
idea.
All right.
Yes.
Pastor Jordan, is there anything that God cannot do?
That he cannot do.
Yeah.
Now, you're sitting
No.
there the same way that I was, and there's a whole lot of things running through your head. And you're probably going to answer it the same way that I did. And I feel like it's because of the way that mentally, like Nina pointed out last night, it was because of how I was raised to think of God. So,
And there's a
Is
whole
there
song about it.
anything that he cannot do?
Well, this is a conundrum, right? Because God created all the things that we're putting in the box of saying what God can and cannot do, right? Like, can God lie, or can God not love? I mean, he created these things, so ultimately he can do whatever he wants, right? So, like, it creates a bit, like, I don't know that I can wrap my head around it full
question?
circle. You know
Right.
what I mean?
yeah.
So the answer really is there are things that he cannot do inside of the character that he is.
Of his own.
His own
Yes.
character.
Right.
For him to be who he says he is, he cannot lie. He
Yeah.
cannot not love, right?
Right.
Like, for him to be who he says he is.
Yeah,
And so, I don't know. I thought it was,
that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
because
good.
it's
Yeah.
very interesting to think, because
Yeah.
it's like he is not going to oppose his will on you.
Right.
You have to choose to follow, or choose to allow him to sort of guide and lay those things out, and you say yes to those moments, right?
Yeah.
And that conversation last night, it just got me thinking, like, it's one of those moments.
Yeah, for sure. I think that hits the nail on the head, though. I mean, based on who he says he is and his word, and that's the only thing we have to say who he says he is.
Right.
I mean, there's no discrepancy in
Yeah.
his character, you know.
Yeah.
so when you mentioned earlier negative ripples, though, it was one of the things you were saying a little while ago. I thought of, like, it literally came into my mind. You were saying things that we had done, and how it would have impacted the kids. And it was like, it's almost like the negative ripples that we put into motion, God just stopped them. Like he put something else in the way that caused good ripples, right? Like, I made a choice, I made a bad ripple, and here comes my mom standing in the middle between that bad decision and my kid, and kind of like, look, but God's still good, but God still loves you. Or maybe it was a mentor or a whatever, whatever in that moment, like that God just threw another rock in the water to stop that ripple, to, change the trajectory. Not all ripples are good,
And not all results of the ripples are good. Even if you think that you're trying to do good, you could still be in some ways causing some negative ripples, right? Like, if I'm just forcing my religion or my beliefs onto somebody, I'm really causing some more damage than I am good in most ways, right? Because they have to see my actions and see me live it out is going to speak louder than me trying to smack somebody with my Bible, right? So I might be able to cause ripples by doing that, but it's not really going to be good ripples. It's not pushing people towards Jesus, right? So I always like to try to think of it like, or gauge it based off of, are your ripples pushing people towards Jesus or pushing people away from Jesus?
Yeah.
Because just because you think that you're doing something good, it's not necessarily causing good effects.
Yeah. That even leads into the what we often see in the context of, someone that's not necessarily following Christ, but they say, well, I'm a good person, well, what does that really mean?
Yeah, right, right. Getting to watch our kids make choices, it's almost like breaking generational ripples in some ways, though. It's like you said, right? Your grandma, your mom, you, and if we're able to, the plan is to try to stop that from reoccurring. I'm not saying if they get married and things work out that they're at that age and it happens.
Bro, she made it to 20.
But at the end of
We
the
don't have
day,
grandkids.
that's like sort of like the goal, right? Is to sort of look at it like, here are the choices that my parents made. Here are the choices that I've made. I don't want that to continue. Mm-hmm. So like you said, it's keep pointing them back to Jesus and to what causes me not to want to do that.
Well, we take time. I don't know, years ago I heard this Skillet song, what is it? Monster? And it talks about, this monster inside of you, and when you feed it, it demands to be fed, Yeah. And I don't know, like I heard that song and I literally like turned it into parenting. Like I tell my kids all the time, like every single human being is born with a monster inside. Mm-hmm. And the problem is you don't know what that monster eats until you feed it. Yeah. But once you fed it, now it's demanding, so maybe it eats anger, maybe it eats pornography, maybe it eats, sex outside of marriage, whatever it is, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is that your monster is eating. Once you fed it, now you have to starve it. And that is so much more work than choosing just not to feed it in the first place. Like just choose not to. If there's a possibility that it could take you down the wrong road, like just don't do that,
So, Bible reading, praying, staying in the Word, like sort of feeding that side of it and causing ripples, right? Because kids are kind of unique, right? Down here, you can pretend or play church with people in this room, and they sort of play along and go along with it and don't call you out on it, right? Because that's not socially accepted, or I'm not going to be rude or ignorant. But upstairs, it's not really like that. Kids
they don't have filters.
Yeah, kids don't know how to pretend or to be fake like that. So they call you out or they emulate what they see you doing. So what little stones are you sort of throwing currently into their lives that are creating ripples or creating habits that get them to read the Bible or get them to pray or to get them to sort of chase after or point back to Jesus, like your mom said, to where it's like pointing them back to Jesus? So what does that look like?
It depends, honestly. Like, our two campuses are vastly different. Like, as much as we want them to be the same, the demographic alone makes them different. At this campus, like we said, we had a lot of older elementary kids that just bumped out. And that, like, I was talking to some of the teachers today, and they were like, this is so weird, like, it felt so different. And a lot of the identity was built around the idea of all of those older kids in the classroom, and we lost those kids. So we're going to be rebuilding that identity with this new generation of kids that we just got, because as many fifth graders as we just lost, that room just gained that many kindergartners. So, like, we're going to be rebuilding our identity around the younger part of that generation. And so the first thing we do is the kids, by the end of it, sometimes dislike it. But we do a lot of repetition. And so we will Every time when they come into the classroom, we start with worship. That's how we start. And no, we don't force them to stand up, but we do highly encourage them. We'll like engage them. And the biggest thing is if we're not setting that example ourselves and going up to the front and worshiping, they won't. I shared a story about when I was upstairs on a Thursday night about how I had 14 or 15 kids and only one of them made the choice to come up and worship. And that night I just wanted to test. Like I knew I was going to be losing a lot of these fifth graders. I knew, not losing, but they were going to be coming downstairs. I knew that all this transition was going to be happening. I was going to get a new group in, and I kind of wanted to just see, has it been impactful yet? Like, will they just make those choices on their own yet, or do they still need to be shown how to behave outside of the classroom? Like, do they need to be shown how to have that relationship still, or are they starting to get the pieces and start building it themselves? And so I went ahead and I just went to the front and started worshiping myself. And only one little boy out of the group came up to the front and worshiped with me. The rest of them were in the back talking, playing games, doing tag, heads up, all these different things they were doing. There were some fifth graders in that mix down to my first graders that were just participating that way. And this little boy was like a third grader. But I don't think, he kept watching me and he kept just waiting to see if I would walk away, because if I would have walked away in that moment, knowing that child, he would have walked away too. He would have went back to doing the talking and playing games. But because I was that example for him and was showing him what I expected and not just saying it, he was willing to participate. And so even though most of the kids didn't get much out of that worship session, one did. One made the choice that I was wanting to see if they were there yet, if they were there to make that choice yet. And then outside of that, we do a lot of repetition we do Bible sword drills where they're learning how to open their physical Bibles. Because, my phone's more convenient. Finding the verses on here and just clicking Matthew 12 is easy and convenient. But in all reality, as soon as the first Facebook notification comes across my screen, I get distracted. As soon as I see one of my games on my way to my Bible app, I might click on that first, and then half an hour later, it's time for me to go on to my next task, and I didn't get my Bible reading in that day. And so for me, my physical Bible is really the only way I can make sure I'm actually having my devotional and actually having an intimate moment. And so I find it really important to make sure that they know how to use a physical Bible. The iPads and things are nice for the kids, but they don't need them in the classroom. We have physical Bibles, and that's why, because we want to cut out all distraction in their devotional time and make that good habit of that devotional time is with a physical Bible by myself, not with my iPad. Like all the electronics get sat under the seats in the classroom, so then they can have a one-on-one time with their Bibles, with their studies. As for their prayer habits, the first couple times we'll have a group of kids like this. Since we're going to be having a large group of kids, we might have one of our older kids pray, or if there's not many older kids that are comfortable praying, we might pray ourselves or popcorn pray. Any of those will do. But it's more so a thing of just getting them exposed to easy ways to pray, because at this age you need to give them something that is just comfortable. Like our preschool classroom, their prayers really entail God is great, God is good, let us thank him for his food, that kind of a prayer where it's the same prayer every time, but it's getting them in that habit. God knows their hearts, God knows that they're developing this relationship with him, and the words that are coming out of their mouths aren't as important as the fact that they just keep doing it and that they're following the example. And so we see that in the elementary classroom, where we will show them how we expect them to pray. We will show them how to pray well. And then we hand the reins off to them, and we hand them all the prayer requests for all of their friends, and they pray over their friends. And we give them the ability that every time it's time to pray, we explain to them that, listen, we don't have to close our eyes to pray, because we don't. It's not something uber religious to fold your hands, close your eyes, bow your heads to pray. It's not required. But we do teach them, listen, you have to self-reflect a little bit and decide, do I need to close my eyes and hold my hands together to be able to focus on praying? And giving them that little bit of a choice as to I'm not going to make you do it, but this is why you should. has gotten a lot of the kids to where they're making choices about their own faith early, to where that whenever they come into this setting, hopefully those habits will still stay. And it's not just like, well, my teacher said I had to. They can actually see like the reasoning behind it. And so we'll see a lot of kids being willing to volunteer sometimes to pray because they're wanting to pray over their friends. And a lot of times the kids, I give them the choice that they can either come up to the altar, which we just use the front of our stage as the altar like we do downstairs. But we say, you guys can come up to the altar, you can pray at your seat, you can go to a different quiet corner in the room, but we are going to go ahead and pray and we're going to talk to God, so we're going to give him our respect. And so during that time, the kids have learned and adapted to, hey, I need to go off by myself and pray, or hey, I want to go pray with my friends so then I can lay hands on them and pray over them. And you'll see these kids doing that because it's the precedents we set. They wouldn't do any of these things if it wasn't for the fact of repetition and the fact that we're doing them. If I didn't go around praying with kids and holding hands with them and praying over them, or just putting my hand on them and praying over them, or standing in the front of the room and worshiping, they wouldn't do it. And 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to preach in Waynesburg, and I talked on that. Like, I looked around the sanctuary, and no fault of anyone, like, everybody has an off moment, but to watch some of the adults in the room were just standing there, and some of the kids that you would normally see participating were just standing there too. And I was really, really tempted to just go up to the front of the room and worship like we normally do, but I knew in my heart that it wouldn't have changed how those kids reacted, because my influence wasn't as big in that moment as the other adults in the room's influence.
Yeah, how it's being modeled.
And so that's the biggest thing, is like, the kids will only learn what they see.
So we can model ripples.
Yeah. So if you think about it, though, you did bring up, whenever you did preach there at Waynesburg a couple weeks ago, you mentioned about how the church really only has, correct me, but you said 2 hours a week, roughly, on a Sunday, and that equates to like, what was it, 4,000 or something like that, or
52 weeks.
It ends up being, in 12 years we have 52 days.
Yes.
So it's a little bit under 2 months of time that we have with these kids. And that's if they've been in the program from the day they were, like the week that they were born, all the way until the week of their 12th birthday. Like, that's not including like if they have a week of summer vacation every year, or if they take the summer off for sports, or whatever that might look like for them. If they come into the church at like 5 or 6 with their family, and like they come into the church at that point, none of that's included. That is only like the Josh Cross's kids, where they've been in church their entire lives and will continue to be so, and they're getting church every Sunday, every service. But that's where that statistic comes from. It's not including the like vacation times or anything like that.
Yeah, so if you think about that, though, like, a lot of people have this idea, though, that their kids, or even themselves, their 2 hours that they spend in church a week is enough. And if you think of your life like a rock in the ocean, and the ripples of life hitting against it, and it's just sort of eroding over time because of the water hitting it, if you're trying to push back, or if your ripples that you're trying to create in life you're only putting 2 hours of that time into it a week, what kind of impact is that really?
Yeah.
You know, even as adults or even kids, it's like, it has to be a personal, like, outside of these walls lifestyle.
Yeah.
To create those kind of ripples, to even have a chance of lasting. I don't know.
It's got to be real.
Any last comments?
Yeah, I mean, it's just been awesome to see the Crowe family impact in this church, and it's not to, put you guys on a pedestal, and you're all very humble, and but it's cool, genuinely, to see the ripples, and generationally, all the way from Brenda to Dakota to then Rayleigh, and then, you guys are going to have kids one day. It's just God's faithfulness is the common thread throughout it all, so
Yeah.
it's awesome to see.
Being real.
Yeah, real transparency. I mean,
Okay. Well, we hope you enjoyed this week. Thanks for joining with us, and we'll see you next week. Hey, thanks for watching, and we hope you enjoyed this week's episode of The Ripples on CP Talks. Make sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed it, and make sure to follow along as we'll be bringing a new episode every week. And again, thank you, and see you next week.